Hello, and welcome back to Clark's Couch. All right, so this week we're going to be looking at one of the most important events in American history. It was the beginning of a whole new era for our country. The event that made our country what it is today. The event that ignited a people group into banding together with one mission. We celebrate it every year in July, and I'm not talking about my birthday. It's the American Revolution, but you probably already knew that. So, if you remember back in Unit 2, Week 1, we read a ton about the history of America, the United States, how our country became, a country. But I want to take another look mainly at the events that caused the American Revolution and the events that occurred throughout the Revolution and what effect that had on the society or the culture of the time. So, in class, we've been talking a lot about sequencing. So that's kind of where I want your mind to be today, because your project will have something to do with that skill. All right, let's get into it. So let's travel back in time to the 1700s, specifically 1763. Write that down. The French and Indian War had just ended, and the American colonists were feeling pretty great until the King of England, which is, George III.
Hi, I'm George.
Issued a royal proclamation that stopped any colonial expansion westward. So the colonists were pretty upset by this because they felt that by winning the war over the Native Americans, they'd gain access to all the land that had since belonged to the Native Americans or Indians. This was seemingly the beginning to the colonists feeling a very strong sense of rebellion against the king and against the monarchy and the English Empire as a whole. The colonists felt that the monarchy was trying to pen them in, to keep them on the Atlantic coastline so that they would be easier to control, which may have in part been true, but I'm sure the king had many other reasons for issuing the proclamation, but we won't really get into all of that today. All that we need to know is that the colonists were mad, and they stayed mad because of taxes. All right, so let's talk about taxes. So over the course of, forever, the king began putting taxes in place for the colonists. Why, you ask? Let's ask King George.
I put taxes in place to help run the empire. How else was I going to make money?
Now, we're talking lots of taxes. We're talking tax on paper, tax on stamps, tax on tea, tax on sugar, tax on cloth, tax on a lot of things. So the colonists didn't like these taxes. They didn't think they were very fair. So they fought to get a lot of the taxes repealed or canceled. They were successful in many instances, and by 1773, which is 10 years after the proclamation of 1763, mind you, most taxes had been successfully repealed, except the tax on tea. Now, in 1770, 3 years earlier, something occurred in Boston known as the Boston Massacre, where soldiers fired guns into a heated or upset crowd, and 5 of the colonists actually died. So with this said, we already have some bad blood in Boston. So in 1773, when this tea tax was still not repealed, some of the Boston citizens had a little party, and what we like to call the Boston Tea Party. Now, they didn't sit around sipping their tea, discussing current events, and eating scones, although they dumped all of the tea from 3 ships into the Boston Harbor.
Come on, let's dump out all the tea!
So, long story short, George is mad at the colonists are mad at him. He punishes the colonists by closing the port of Boston and banning all town meetings. So now the colonists called these the Intolerable Acts. and they got even more upset. And by this time, lots of people were talking about independence and breaking away from the English Empire. So you have all these people wanting independence, you got all these people that want peace, they just want peace with the king, and then you have lots of people that really just have absolutely no idea what they want. So, many of the brightest minds of the time attended the First Continental Congress, one of the many, many meetings that would shape the future of the American colonies and eventually the United States. So this convention of guys met in 1774 and sent several peace proposals to King George III, which he rejected. In 1775, the people heard rumors that the British are coming to Lexington and Concord, and in fact, they were. So what the British did not expect was that the colonists were ready, and they were ready to fight. And that's exactly what they did. The British retreated like dogs with their tails between their legs. They were scared to death. They weren't expecting it. They weren't prepared to fight all of these people. They weren't prepared for how upset and how ready to fight they were. So this was the beginning of the war, really. And George Washington was appointed as the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. Now, with war happening, they're like, oh my gosh, we gotta meet again. We have a lot to talk about. What are we gonna do? So there was a second Continental Congress where another peace proposal was sent and again rejected by King George III. 5 of our convention delegates were chosen to write an important document, a Declaration of Independence, written in majority by one Thomas Jefferson. So the Congress approved the Declaration in 1776 on July 4th, which we now celebrate as Independence Day. France joined America's fight in 1778, which really helped the colonist army defeat the British soldiers, so that by 1781, we saw the last major battle of the American Revolutionary War, and Congress was approving the country's first governing document, the Articles of Confederation. Which led to a whole different slew of problems, but that's a different topic for a different day. King George III did not accept the independence of the colonies until about 1783, which was 2 years after the last major battle of the war, after they sent the Declaration of Independence to King George. So he finally recognized that they were independent, even though they'd been living pretty independently for several years now. Alright, so I've briefly touched on the dates and times of the revolution, both things leading up to and the events throughout the fight. So what you're going to have to do is you're going to put the events in order. You're creating a timeline of the American Revolution. And working independently, which means by yourself, you'll follow directions that are on your project sheet to research and sequence the events in order that they happened. Now, when that's done, we're also going to be summarizing the causes of the American Revolution and the effects that the revolution had on that day's society and maybe how the United States has changed as a country since the Revolutionary War ended. Well, I certainly hope that you've enjoyed this episode of Clark's Couch, starring me, my couch, and the dog who ran away from me because I don't think she liked being physically manipulated like that. So, good luck with your research, good luck with sequencing, and good luck with your whole project. I will see you back in the classroom.